the president of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, the idea that democracy was a Western phenomenon and would not adopt to what he called Asian values. But of course it did, not only with the struggles in Korea, but also in Taiwan, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and now even a process that is unfolding in Burma shows that democracy is taking very well to Asia. But of course we've seen since the self-immolation of the fruit vendor in Tunisia in December of 2010 and the Arab uprisings, that even though it's going to be very, very difficult in the Middle East, it's now clear that the people in the Middle East want democracy just as much as the people in Latin America want democracy, and just as much as the people in the United States want democracy. Is that in the period ahead, we can expect that efforts to try to expand democracy are going to meet very serious resistance. Dictatorships like China, North Korea, and Cuba, as well as countries that we consider to be semi-authoritarian, and I'll describe what that is. It's a kind of a semi-authoritarian country, and so is Venezuela and the so-called ALBA countries that it's associated with. Countries where there are democratic forms and processes, but where the government seeks to neutralize those processes, to eliminate the checks and balances of democracy, to control the media, to control elections if they are held, and to maintain total power, even though there are more spaces in those countries than there might be in a real authoritarian dictatorship. Parliaments are much weaker in these types of countries because the power is held in the hands of the executive. Civil society may exist, but they pass laws controlling civil society. If they permit the internet, which they do in China, there are always high levels of filtering, censorship, and surveillance. That's how the internet is used by governments in those countries. My third observation is that in many of these new democracies, governance is very poor. Delivering for their people in terms of fighting corruption, in terms of reducing inequality, in terms of providing better health services and education, in terms of dealing with the rule of law, problems of violence, and where the political elites seem to be in some way separated from the grassroots in the country. That these are problems that many Latin American countries have and suffer from. Now, when the changes took place in Latin America in the early 1990s, a political scientist, an Argentine political scientist by the name of Guillermo O'Donnell, said that if Latin America was going to deal with these problems of inequality and good governance, it was going to have to make a second transition from what he called delegative democracy to real, full representative democracy. What he meant by delegative democracy was that a country can elect a president, but that president is not accountable through a legislature, through a free media, through all the institutions that a democracy needs to make it work and to make the policies of the government reflect the needs and desires of the people. And in Latin America, there are two additional problems which complicate the whole issue that Guillermo O'Donnell was talking about, a delegative democracy. One is very, very high levels of inequality, and the second, increasingly in recent years, is very, very high levels of criminal violence. Latin America has only 8% of the world's population, but 40% of the murders and 60% of the kidnappings in the world occur in this hemisphere. Especially difficult in Central America, especially Honduras, but it is also extremely serious in Venezuela. The murders in Honduras are the worst in the world, and they're the second worst in Venezuela. Now, Peru is obviously one of the countries that O'Donnell had in mind when he talked about delegative democracy. In 1994, he wrote that article. Special set of problems. The more recent legacy of authoritarianism from the Fujimori period, high levels of corruption, a large and poor indigenous population, a weak judiciary, and the importance of the mining extraction industry in the country and the issues that that introduces for the rights of the indigenous and the environment, and also, of course, the special history of the Shining Path insurgency, in which 70,000 people were killed. All of this are problems that are especially focused on Peru. In all of this, Peru has actually made remarkable progress over the last decade. Economic growth like Brazil and Chile, and it is less politically polarized than it has ever been before, and it has also reduced poverty in a sense, more significantly than any other country in Latin America, from 44.5% in 2006 to 31.3% in 2010. But obviously there's a long, long way to go. Peru continues to be sharply divided along class and ethnic and regional lines. Its parties remain weak. There's very low, polls show low confidence among citizens in the political leaders, and this discontent has widened because of the continuing inequalities and the grievances from the poorer parts of the population. But Peru, in a very interesting way, is what I think of as a pivotal country in Latin America. Near the center, and it has many of both the strengths and the weaknesses that are spread throughout the hemisphere. So there's a special significance to the efforts that are being made by parliaments and civil society here to solve the problems, because it'll be watched broadly in the hemisphere and beyond. And here I just want to talk about the work that is being done here in three areas. Strengthening the legislature, where we now sit, so that Peru can have the kind of checks and balances with a strong legislature that a democracy needs. The work here of the group sponsoring this meeting is terribly important. The work of Conferencia Peru in strengthening the oversight and negotiation capacities of key congressional committees, of Reflexión Democrática, in helping grassroots women's organizations connect with the parliament and with the women's caucus in the parliament, of the National Democratic Institute working with Reflexión Democrática in creating an online platform to foster communication and real-time debate about issues, and of the Republican Institute that is supported by NED, part of the NED family, working with the political caucuses or bancadas in the parliament to help them develop policies, to help them be responsive to the needs of voters and develop consensus around political issues. And the second area is what is being done to empower the indigenous groups to be able to protect their rights, especially in the areas of the extractive industries. The work that is being done by the Association Pro Derechos Humanos, APRODE, which has facilitated meetings between indigenous groups and elected officials to resolve local conflicts. I know we have the presence here of the leader of APRODE. I want to note the work of the Derechos Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, which has helped strengthen the capacity for negotiation and advocacy of a network of indigenous paralegals that are trying to work in local communities. And I also want to note the work of the Due Process of Law Foundation, which is a Latin America-wide organization, but is run by a Peruvian lawyer, the remarkable lawyer Katia Salazar, which has laid the groundwork through its legal work for the law of prior consultation, which is an unprecedented law that creates a legal framework for protecting the rights of local communities to be informed before and to give prior consent before the implementation of large-scale extractive projects. And the third area is to promote greater economic equality and social inclusion. And here I want to note the social agenda plan that has been developed by former President Alejandro Toledo in cooperation with 20 former presidents in Latin America. It's a plan designed to really eliminate the problem of deep poverty. And it deals with tax reform, it deals with the development of human capital through conditional cash transfers where parents get small stipends from the government if the kids go to school and get proper health care. It deals with education and health services, expanding health services. It deals with issues of environment, bridging the digital divide. It deals with gender equity, the inclusion of indigenous peoples. It's a broad, comprehensive strategy to try to reduce inequality in society, not just in Peru, but in all countries that suffer from these problems. President Toledo has been quite explicit, quite frank in saying that he has a dual purpose, two purposes in pushing the social agenda. Structural, because unless the problem of inequality cannot be addressed and human capital developed, Peru and other countries will not be able to really develop as true democracies. Political purpose, where he is openly trying to offer an alternative to authoritarian populism, which, as you know, has strong advocates elsewhere in the hemisphere. Authoritarian populism is that it's divisive, it's a threat to human rights, and it also doesn't have a solution to problems. As the political philosopher Fukuyama has said, it can offer short-term solutions, but these short-term solutions actually worsen the long-term strategies for dealing with these problems. And in the case of Venezuela, the short-term solutions are only possible because they're financed by oil. Let me just say a brief word now, because I've raised the issue of Venezuela, about the election that took place just 5 days ago, in which President Chavez won his third six-year term. He won by a 10-point margin, but this was the opposition's strongest showing ever. And I think it's fair to say that had there been a level playing field in Venezuela, that margin would have been less and the result could even have been reversed. But there wasn't a level playing field because the media, the large media, is completely controlled by the state. Billions of dollars of oil resources were spent in securing votes among the poor, and many people, millions of people, went to the polls fearing that, as happened in previous elections and in the referendum in 2004, that if they voted against the government, it might affect their jobs and their security. The opposition, to its credit, is not challenging the result, but is rather looking to the future toward the gubernatorial elections that are going to be held in December. And I think it's clear to me that if Chavez does not begin to address the very, very serious problems that exist in Venezuela, from rampant crime to collapsing bridges, to the highest level of inflation in the hemisphere, to the worst political polarization in this hemisphere, then his support could erode and the opposition's support could grow, especially if the country goes into recession after the enormous funding for the election has ended. Also the uncertainties surrounding President Chavez's health. But let me be clear. Venezuelans are going to have to solve their own problems, but those in Venezuela who are seeking a peaceful and progressive path to a democratic future, in my view, deserve the continued moral support and solidarity of others in the hemisphere and outside the hemisphere. And the same holds for the people in Cuba who are fighting for rights under even more difficult circumstances. Wednesday evening, the World Movement for Democracy will be presenting one of its 3 Democracy Courage tributes to the pro-democracy movement of Cuba.